I've always been embarrassed by my movie collection. I used to go to Best Buy when I was younger and pick out a DVD to bring home, but in hindsight, these were not exactly the movies you wanted to show off. As a big horror fan, my collection of horror movies is severely lacking. With streaming services getting more expensive and getting less content, it's time for me to start building out my own horror physical movie library that I could be proud of. I'm Rob from the Masters of Nonsense, and I'm here to talk about Chud. Is this movie worth trudging through the sewers to find? What's the gimmick? Chud, released in 1984. The official logline of the film is, "A bizarre series of sudden disappearances on the streets of New York City seems to point towards something unsavory living in the sewers." So, a rash of bizarre murders in New York City seem to point to a group of grotesquely deformed vagrants living in the sewers. A policeman, a photojournalist and his girlfriend, and a soup kitchen worker who seems to know a lot about these creatures band together to try to determine what the creatures are and how to stop them. I went into this movie knowing absolutely nothing about it. Honestly, not a single thing. I've always seen the name Chud come up on horror movie lists, but I couldn't remember if these were the best or worst lists. I just knew the name Chud and figured it was probably a comedy. This movie was far from it. Much to my surprise, this was more of a drama than anything.
3 minutes and we're out of here.
I have a short attention span. With little time to spare, I make my initial judgment on a movie based on its first 3 minutes. And 3 minutes in on Chud, I'm all in. We see what I'm thinking is a Chud's hand popping out of the sewer to pull down a woman who is walking her dog. Now I already want to know what this sewer creature looks like and what they eat. But time will tell with this movie to see if it will keep me invested through its 96-minute runtime. Mark out moment. When I started to realize that this may actually be the prequel to Home Alone. We have two of the main cast members from the 1990 Christmas movie take prominent roles in Chud. The deadbeat dad who forgets his son is a photographer, and one of the wet bandits works as the soup kitchen worker. I was glued to every scene waiting for them to interact. In actuality, this is probably one of the only reasons why I stayed through to the end. In my mind, while this movie was playing, I was building out Home Alone 0. And how did we get to Home Alone from here? Well, I'm thinking that the dad may have sued New York City over radiation in the sewers, which gave him more than enough money to go ahead and live in a gigantic mansion with his 40 kids. And the wet bandit, well, maybe he didn't have as much luck. He probably wanted to ride the coattails with the dad and win big over the city, only to be abandoned by him and left with nothing. He meets up with Joe Pesci to exact revenge on the dad, only to find out that he's a careless bastard who doesn't care enough for his own kid to actually make sure that he's with him when he goes on vacation. And then hilarity ensues. Well, I guess I should probably get back to Chud. Blown spot. Now, my fantasy booking of Home Alone 0 was made possible by the rather slow pace of this movie. As I mentioned earlier, I went in expecting a comedy, and this was far from it. So it already lost a lot of momentum for me. On top of that, this movie drags on for way too many Chudless minutes. An hour in, and we've only seen them for about 3 seconds on screen. Granted, the last half hour or so does pick up on the chudding, but my mind was already made up. The big leg, brother. Some notable happenings before the finish is that we find out that the city is in on the whole plant radiation in the sewers plan, which is causing the Chuds. Chuds being cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. They are the ones that are kidnapping people and animals and eating them. Now they're breaking through the sewers to eat on land. We spend the last 20 minutes with a lot of Chud activity. The police block the sewers to minimize the amount of Chud on land, while Home Alone dad and wet bandit end up in the sewers huffing radiation. They finally get out and a car explodes over a sewer cap and seemingly disperses Chud mist into the air, which likely does set up Chud 2. Break it down. Let me break down this movie to see if it meets the criteria of shelling out some money to buy. The Chud music and sound effects are really cool. Definitely for the time, it was great and memorable and just kind of creepy. The Chuds look cool too. They have glowing radiation eyes, which makes them stand out quite a bit and definitely would make for a pretty cool poster. The booking. Now, this movie was as real as it can get. There was a whole other plot with a police captain named Bosch, which was just a perfect name for him. So fitting that the name Bosch is said several hundred times over the course of this movie. The movie felt real for the time and even now. Living in New York my whole life, I certainly believed that I unknowingly stood over Chud and they probably tried to grab me at some point. Going home. If I were in a different mindset, I might have enjoyed this movie a bit more. They acted the hell out of their roles, and this came off as serious as you can make it. And to think that this movie came out with a lot of incredible movies in that same year, like Terminator and Ghostbusters. And honestly, it felt like it was part of that caliber of writing and production. Of course, not as great, but it felt like they were putting in a lot of effort to make this something special. At the same time, I found myself overly bored with the movie and forgot that it was on at some points. I watched it on Amazon Prime, and it's also available on Pluto TV, Roku Channel, Plex, and Tubi. And those feel like perfect spots for this movie, far away from my new collection of horror movies. Chud is a bit of a dud, and will not be making it into the Masters of Nonsense horror movie collection. Let's call for the bell because now we have our decision. This movie did not take a spot on the official Masters of Nonsense movie shelf. Are you thinking about getting this movie? Do you think the decision should be overturned? Let us know by joining the discussion on our Threads page and all of our other social media available on this screen. Like, subscribe, repeat. Always repeat.